They were often the last ones to be sent in, and most of the time, they didn't come back alive. These men carried a weapon, feared by everyone, but that fear didn't stop them from stepping forward. On the black, burning sands of Iwo Jima, American Marines faced an enemy that had turned the very ground beneath their feet into a trap. The only way forward was through fire. Literally, they had to use one of the most terrifying tools in their arsenal. It was capable of fleshing out Japanese soldiers hiding in bunkers and caves, burning through the defenses where bullets and grenades failed. But while the flamethrower could clear out the enemy, it came with a deadly cost. The men who carried it were exposed and vulnerable. Most of them didn't survive longer than a few minutes on the battlefield. Carrying a tank of fuel on their backs made them walking targets. One direct shot, and they were gone. This is more than just a story about a weapon. It's a story about the horrors that unfolded on one of the deadliest islands of the Pacific, and the brave men who knowingly walked into those horrors, knowing the odds were against them. In recent years, secret documents and testimonies from the few who made it back alive have revealed the true scale of what happened when flame met stone on that cursed island. But to understand why fire became so crucial, we must first understand what kind of place the Marines were fighting on. Iwo Jima wasn't some ordinary stretch of land. It was a lifeless, jagged piece of volcanic rock, dark as coal, lying in the Pacific, like a wound on the ocean's surface. It was roughly 8 square miles in size, constantly steaming with heat and sulfur. There was no plant life, no water, and no shelter. Wind howled across the barren landscape, and the sun beat down mercilessly. It was uninviting and hostile in every way, and yet, for the United States military, it was one of the most valuable pieces of land in the entire Pacific campaign. Its location was crucial, right between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland. This placed it directly along the flight path used by American B-29 bombers during their missions to strike Japan. Taking the island would allow for emergency landings, refueling, and provide a launching point for fighter planes to accompany and protect the bombers on their deadly runs. If they could hold it, they would gain a major strategic advantage. But if they failed, thousands of lives would be lost, and it would become a massive graveyard in the middle of the ocean. The Japanese military leadership had seen this threat coming months earlier. They understood the island's value as clearly as the Americans did. But instead of preparing to fight above ground, like in traditional battles, they made a decision that broke from all expectations. Under the leadership of General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, they began to shape the island into a deadly trap. Kuribayashi did not believe in wasting soldiers on hopeless charges. He saw the Americans as technologically superior and knew they would eventually overpower Japan. But his goal was not to win. Iwo Jima was never meant to be held forever. His mission was to inflict so much damage, to cause such a high number of American casualties, that the United States might hesitate before deciding to invade Japan itself. To carry out this plan, Kuribayashi ordered the construction of an extensive underground fortress. They didn't build open trenches that could be bombed from the air. Instead, they carved over 11 miles of tunnels into the island's core. These tunnels connected command centers, artillery positions, machine gun nests, storage rooms, and living quarters, all buried beneath tons of volcanic rock. They were lined with steel and reinforced with concrete. Their entrances and exits were camouflaged so expertly that American planes couldn't detect them, no matter how many times they flew over. It was a hidden city of death, completely sealed off from the outside, and it was built with one purpose: to bleed the enemy dry. Kuribayashi's tactics were focused on delay, surprise, and exhaustion. There would be no wild attacks, no dramatic suicidal charges. His men were told to wait, stay quiet, and strike when the enemy was most vulnerable. The Japanese soldiers were not trying to stop the Americans at the beach. They planned to let them land, settle in, and then kill them slowly. When the first waves of U.S. Marines came ashore in February 1945, they didn't realize what they were walking into. They thought they were landing on an island. In truth, they were stepping onto the surface of a massive, silent volcano built to destroy them from within. On the morning of February 19, 1945, the U.S. began one of the most intense pre-landing attacks of the entire war. Navy ships shelled the island non-stop for days, and heavy bombers dropped tons of explosives from the sky. The earth shook, fire lit up the skies, and huge craters tore through the surface. American commanders believed they had softened up the defenses enough for an invasion. But what they didn't know was that most of the Japanese troops were safe, underground, untouched by the bombardment, and ready for the fight. As the landing began, thousands of Marines arrived in Higgins boats and stepped onto the beach. But the beach wasn't what they expected. It was made of fine dark ash from volcanic eruptions, soft and thick, which swallowed up boots, jammed tank wheels, and made movement slow and exhausting. There were no trees or large rocks to hide behind, just open ground and sky. At first, nothing happened. For more than an hour, there was silence. No bullets, no explosions. Some thought the bombing had worked. Others felt uneasy. Then, without warning, everything changed. From invisible bunkers and camouflaged hills, the Japanese unleashed a storm of firepower. Shells exploded in the surf. Machine guns swept across the black sand. Mortar rained down on the landing craft. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Screams of pain, smoke, fire, and confusion spread across the beach. Medics struggled to keep up. Communication broke down. Tanks were destroyed, and wave after wave of new Marines arrived, only to be trapped in the same deadly zone. The entire landing force was caught in a trap with nowhere to run. The Japanese had waited for the perfect moment and then struck with full force. They had no interest in defending the beach itself. They wanted to make it a place of death, and they succeeded. Even as Marines pushed forward, they found themselves in a battlefield like no other. There were no front lines. A position could be taken 1 minute and attacked from behind the next. The ground was full of tunnels, hiding places, and dangers that defied logic. American forces quickly learned that normal tactics would not work. The deeper they moved into the island, the more unpredictable and deadly the fighting became. There were no clear enemies in front. Danger came from every side, and even from underneath. The most terrifying part of the island's defenses were the pillboxes. These weren't simple bunkers. They were expertly designed killing machines, strong enough to survive tank shells and naval gunfire. They were hidden and protected in ways that made them almost impossible to destroy. Each had hidden entrances and overlapping fields of fire, meaning one could protect another. A soldier trying to attack one would often be shot from a different direction he didn't even see. What made them worse was the tunnel system beneath them. Many pillboxes were connected underground. Even if you destroyed one, enemy soldiers could return to it later from another tunnel and launch a surprise attack. Marines weren't just advancing forward, they were constantly being attacked from the rear, the sides, and below. Grenades and small arms only worked if you could get close enough to throw them inside. But getting that close meant crawling through open ground under constant machine gun fire. And even when a Marine reached the pillbox and got a grenade inside, the winding design of the interior often absorbed the blast, leaving the defenders alive and ready to keep fighting. The fight became a nightmare of slow, painful progress. Every foot of land taken was paid for with blood. Then someone remembered an old weapon that had been mostly forgotten. The flamethrower. It wasn't a new invention. It had been used in World War I, but never on such a scale. On Iwo Jima, it became the only reliable way to clear out the deeply dug-in enemy. Fire did what bullets couldn't. It spread into every corner, used up all the oxygen, and left no space to hide. It could reach defenders behind walls, in tunnels, and around corners. Marines began to carry flamethrowers into battle, strapping heavy tanks to their backs, armed only with a sidearm and the flame itself. They moved through smoke, debris, and enemy fire, turning the island's tunnels and bunkers into blazing tombs. It was brutal and horrifying, but it was often the only way to survive. The men who carried these weapons were some of the bravest and most vulnerable on the battlefield. Every step they took was a step closer to death. But they kept moving forward, bringing fire into the darkness, because there was no other choice. On Iwo Jima, fire became not just a weapon, but a last hope for victory. What the flamethrower could do to the enemy was only the start. The true horror came when people saw what it did to the soldiers who used it. The first American troops to land on Iwo Jima, carrying flamethrowers, brought the M2 model, a powerful device that needed both physical strength and a fearless mindset to handle. When filled, the weapon weighed close to 70 pounds. It had 2 large tanks full of fuel and another in the center holding nitrogen gas, all strapped to the operator's back like a ticking time bomb. The fuel inside was a sticky mix of gasoline and diesel, like thick jelly that clung to anything and continued burning. The nozzle, held like a gun, had a small device at the tip that used white phosphorus to start the flame. Once the trigger was pulled, a loud blast of fire would shoot out up to 30 yards away, but only for about 10 seconds. That short window was all the operator had. Just 10 seconds to do the job, before the flames ran out and he became the #1 target on the field. Everyone who carried the weapon knew they had only one shot, one short burst, before they were left with a heavy, empty shell on their back and a bright target painted on them. The Japanese soldiers were well aware of how dangerous flamethrowers were, and their orders were clear: kill the man with the flames first. To them, flamethrower operators were monsters. Every time one appeared, they were met with an overwhelming storm of bullets, grenades, and explosives. Japanese troops were told to do whatever it took to stop them. That often meant ambushing these operators, shooting them without hesitation, or capturing them if possible. And that thought terrified American troops more than anything. One Marine remembered seeing a fellow soldier rush a cave with a flamethrower only for it to malfunction. Before he could retreat, 2 Japanese soldiers pulled him into the darkness. For 2 days afterward, nearby Marines heard his screams and, then silence. No one was able to save him. That's why many flamethrower men begged their own units to kill them rather than let them be captured. They knew the horror that awaited them. Even those who made it out alive were haunted by what they had done. Many never spoke of it again. The sounds, the stench, and the images of what fire did to human bodies in closed spaces stayed with them forever. Carrying that weapon and witnessing its effects left deep mental scars. Some never recovered. Though they made it back from the war, their minds never truly escaped. They had constant nightmares and memories that wouldn't fade. The flamethrower wasn't just terrifying because of its destructive power. It was terrifying because it forced soldiers to see war in the most personal, brutal way possible. You weren't shooting at someone far away, you were burning someone just a few steps in front of you. Most operators claimed they were only doing what they had to, following orders like everyone else. But years later, many admitted they never truly made peace with what they'd done. The M2 wasn't just a weapon, it turned small spaces into death traps. Its flames could reach over 1,000 degrees. In caves and bunkers, it burned through the air itself. It sucked up all the oxygen in seconds, leaving nothing to breathe. Victims collapsed almost immediately. Some doctors later believed they passed out before they could feel pain. But not everyone agreed. To the soldiers using the flamethrowers, it never felt like a clean or simple way to fight. One operator said that after clearing out a pillbox with fire, he climbed inside once the smoke cleared. What he saw made him throw up. He sat outside for an hour, unable to speak, until a superior officer ordered him to return to battle. There was no time to grieve or reflect, just orders to follow and another bunker to clear. The tanks the operators wore were dangerous enough to make every step feel like walking through a minefield. Some soldiers believed even one bullet could cause the tanks to explode in a fireball. That wasn't exactly accurate. The fuel was stored under pressure, not set to blow like a bomb. But the fear remained. Just the idea of becoming a human torch was enough to rattle anyone. That constant dread wasn't just physical, it ate at their minds. Many refused to use the flamethrower again after seeing what it did. Some asked to be reassigned. Some became physically sick before missions. Others never told their families what they had done during the war. The flamethrower was effective. It helped end battles that seemed impossible to win. But it also crushed the people who used it. And as the military realized they were losing flamethrower operators faster than they could train new ones, they searched for another option, one that didn't rely on sending a man into hell on foot. The answer didn't lie in sending more people. It came from machines. As the loss rate for flamethrower troops rose to over 90%, commanders made a chilling choice. They put the flame inside a tank. The result was the M4A3R3 Sherman, a regular tank turned into a fire-spitting giant. Its main gun was replaced with a flamethrower, and it became known simply as the Flame Sherman. When it arrived on Iwo Jima, the situation changed quickly, where the backpack M2 could only shoot about 30 yards. The Flame Sherman could spray fire nearly 100 yards, where a soldier had only 10 seconds of fuel. This tank held 300 gallons, enough to shoot flames across wide areas in multiple waves. And most important of all, it had armor. It could get close to enemy bunkers and tunnels without being torn apart by gunfire. But that armor wasn't perfect. The volcanic ash covering Iwo Jima's ground made movement hard. The soft surface clogged the tank tracks, making them easy to spot and slow to move. Japanese troops knew that if they destroyed a flame tank, they could possibly turn the tide of a battle. Every time one of these tanks opened fire, it instantly became the enemy's top target. They faced suicide attacks, buried bombs, and hidden traps. These tanks were marked for destruction. Inside those tanks were crews that stayed inside for hours, knowing one wrong hit could turn them into ash in seconds. But still, they went forward. Infantry moved with them, providing cover. Regular tanks guarded their sides. When they reached the front line, the flame tanks would turn toward caves or bunkers and let loose with fire so hot it melted anything in its path. The impact wasn't just physical, it broke the enemy's spirit. Some Japanese positions gave up as soon as they saw the tanks. Others ran, disappearing into the smoke. Some Marines said it looked like watching the gates of hell open wide. And even though it was horrifying, the tanks worked. Without them, taking the island might not have been possible. Among the Marines, one man's story stood out: Hershel Woody Williams. On February 23, 1945, the same day the American flag was famously raised on Mount Suribachi, another brutal fight was happening far below. There were no photos, no proud moments, just more bloodshed. In those lower grounds, Woody carried his flamethrower forward, facing the same horrors as all the others. But what he did there earned him a place in history, showing that even in the worst places, bravery could still shine through. That was when Hershel Woody Williams, a soft-spoken Marine from West Virginia, was given a task many believed was certain death. His mission was to take out a series of heavily fortified enemy bunkers that had trapped his entire unit. Several Marines had already tried and died in the attempt. No one wanted the responsibility. Woody accepted. He was supported by 4 other Marines, and 2 of them were killed almost immediately after the mission began. With his flamethrower strapped to his back, Woody began crawling through the soft, black ash. all while bullets rained down around him. His goal was to destroy concrete bunkers that had been strengthened with layers of steel and built with deadly precision. The Japanese had designed them to overlap each other's firepower, so any movement forward was met with instant, concentrated gunfire. Woody, however, stayed steady. He moved carefully, hiding behind mounds of earth and bomb craters, waiting for the right moment to strike. When he reached the first bunker, he found a small gap near a vent and inserted the nozzle of his flame. He fired. Flames burst into the structure, followed by screams, then silence. Without hesitation, he moved to the next bunker, and then another. Each time he used up the fuel in his weapon, he ran back to retrieve another full tank and returned to the fight. Since the M2 flamethrower only worked for a few seconds at a time, he had to repeat this dangerous process over and over. By the end, Woody had destroyed 7 enemy positions by himself. At one point, a Japanese soldier rushed toward him with a bayonet. Woody turned and fired a blast of fire, stopping the attacker instantly. He showed no fear, no hesitation. To others watching, it looked as if nothing could touch him, like he wasn't even afraid to die. Thanks to him, his fellow Marines were finally able to push forward. What set Woody apart wasn't raw strength, but his ability to stay calm under extreme pressure and keep moving forward without freezing up. He didn't seek attention, and he didn't lose control. Even when the fighting ended, Woody never thought of himself as a hero. He couldn't forget what he had seen or what his weapon had done, but the Marines around him never forgot what he did. Woody was awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the only flamethrower operator in the Second World War to receive that recognition. His actions became part of Marine Corps history. Still, the truth behind that award was more painful than glorious. Woody lived a long life and passed away in 2022 at the age of 98. But even near the end, Iwo Jima remained a quiet presence in his mind. In interviews, he admitted that much of the battle itself was a blur to him, likely his mind's way of protecting him from the trauma. But what stayed with him were the faces of the friends who never came home, the ones who gave their lives so he could make it a few steps farther, the names he saw carved in stone while he continued walking through life. He often said, "I've never thought of myself as a hero. The real heroes are the ones who didn't make it back." Behind that humility was a deep emotional weight. Even years later, Woody struggled with what he had done. His weapon didn't just kill it, destroyed in the most horrifying way. It didn't just stop threats, it erased people from existence. For all the success it brought in battle, it also caused harm to the one using it. Woody never praised the flamethrower. He accepted that it had to be used, but he never forgot what that meant, and he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Many other flamethrower operators from the Pacific Campaign rarely spoke about what they did. Some kept it hidden from their families for their entire lives. Others suffered in silence, overwhelmed by guilt or shattered by trauma. Reports from veterans groups later revealed that former flamethrower troops faced higher rates of depression, alcoholism, and even suicide. The weapon worked too well, and that became part of the problem. Experts who studied the psychological effects of combat found that flamethrower users often dealt with deeper emotional damage than other soldiers. They weren't just killing enemies from a distance, they were up close, face-to-face, ending lives in a way that felt disturbing and unnatural. The sounds, the images, the smell of burning flesh, and the echoing cries from caves didn't fade with time. These memories stayed locked inside their minds. By the 1970s, the military officially removed flamethrowers from their equipment. They claimed the weapon was no longer useful, but the truth was harder to say. Out loud, it had become too horrifying to justify. Still, the memory of it didn't vanish. Not for the men who carried it, not for those who faced it, and not for anyone who still wakes up at night thinking about what it did. Over time, the world began to see flamethrowers differently. They stopped being seen as practical weapons and started being viewed as symbols of war's darkest side. Governments began pulling them quietly from their weapon stockpiles. Military thinkers and human rights experts debated whether using flamethrowers could be seen as crossing a moral line. Eventually, rules started taking shape. In 1980, the United Nations included fire-based weapons in a list of restricted devices. Flamethrowers weren't completely outlawed, but their use in civilian areas and against groups of people became strictly limited. Even countries like the United States began to move away from them, not because they weren't effective, but because the human cost was too high. The flamethrower forced everyone to confront a harsh truth that war is not about parades or medals. It is about suffering, fear, and fire. No other weapon brought soldiers so close to their targets or demanded they eliminate them in such a brutal, personal way. The men who carried flamethrowers at Iwo Jima didn't ask for the role. They weren't cruel or heartless. They were Marines with a single mission: to survive a battlefield built to destroy them. They were seen as weapons themselves, walking flames sent into the darkness, knowing most wouldn't come back. Out of the 335 American flamethrower operators who fought on Iwo Jima, only 18 made it home. That's a death rate of 92%. Many died before they could even use their weapon. Some were caught after running out of fuel. The few who survived were never the same again. But they did what they had to because, in that burning wasteland, there was no other way forward. Eventually, the island was taken. The American flag was raised. The war moved closer to Japan. But, for those who carried fire on their backs, the cost of that victory was something history doesn't often mention, and maybe that's why these stories need to be told. Because some weapons leave marks that never fade. And some burdens are so heavy, no metal will ever be enough to carry them. Even in victory, war leaves behind more than broken ground. It leaves broken hearts, haunted minds, and stories too heavy for most to carry. Woody Williams showed unmatched bravery, but his story is not just about courage under fire. It's about the quiet cost of survival, the unseen wounds of those who lived, and the weight of remembering what others cannot forget. His legacy reminds us that behind every medal is a man, behind every act of heroism is a burden, and behind every weapon is a question we still struggle to answer.